Here are 5 of the cruelest rulers in history that make your worst boss look like a saint. You're a peasant child living in 15th century France, and there's a nobleman everyone loves. Gilles de Rais fought alongside Joan of Arc. He's wealthy beyond measure, and he's a celebrated war hero. He also happens to be one of the most prolific serial killers in human history, but nobody knows that yet, not until the bodies start piling up. Gilles de Rais was born into French nobility in 1405 and distinguished himself as a military commander during the 100 Years' War. He fought with Joan of Arc and was so respected that he was appointed Marshal of France at just 25 years old. He had everything: money, power, respect, multiple castles. Then Joan of Arc was executed, and something in Gilles' brain just snapped like a dry twig. He became obsessed with the occult and alchemy, spending his fortune on bizarre experiments trying to summon demons. But that wasn't the disturbing part. That was just expensive and weird. The disturbing part was that he started kidnapping children from the villages surrounding his castles. Hundreds of them. Boys between the ages of 6 and 18, usually from poor families who wouldn't be missed. He'd lure them with promises of food, money, or work. Sometimes his servants would just grab them off the street. What happened next in his castle is so horrific that even in his confession, extracted under torture, admittedly, the details are almost unreadable. He would dress the children in fine clothes, feed them, and make them comfortable. Then he'd torture and kill them in ways that would make modern horror movies look like children's cartoons. He'd dismember them while they were still alive, taking breaks to assault them, then resume the killing. He kept their heads as trophies, sometimes arranging them to judge which child had been the most beautiful. His favorite method was decapitation, and he'd kiss the severed heads of the ones he found particularly attractive. The total body count is estimated between 140 and 600 children over nearly a decade, 140 to 600. The trial records describe servants disposing of bodies by burning them in his castle fireplaces, the smell of burning human flesh becoming so common that neighbors complained about the constant smoke. When authorities finally raided his castles in 1440, they found children's remains everywhere, in chests, buried in the cellars, stuffed in secret rooms. Gilles de Rais confessed to everything without much pressure, seeming almost relieved to finally talk about it. He was hanged and burned in 1440. The Catholic Church was so disturbed by his crimes that they made sure to give him last rites and a Christian burial anyway, because even medieval France had standards about some things, apparently. His story likely inspired the Bluebeard fairy tale, which is adorable, turning a child serial killer into a children's story. The Brothers Grimm really knew their audience. Let's move east to China, where cruelty got creative. You're living in 7th century China, and a woman has just become emperor. Not empress, emperor. Wu Zetian is the only woman in Chinese history to hold that title, and she got there by making absolutely sure that anyone who stood in her way didn't stand for very long, or breathe, or keep their limbs attached. Wu Zetian started as a concubine to Emperor Taizong. When he died, she was supposed to become a nun that was the tradition for dead emperors' concubines. Instead, she seduced the new emperor. Taizong's son, Gaozong, married him and systematically eliminated everyone between her and absolute power. First, she dealt with Gaozong's existing wife, Empress Wang. Wu accused her of murdering Wu's infant daughter. Most historians think Wu actually killed her own baby to frame the Empress, which is playing 4D chess with infanticide. Once she got rid of Empress Wang, Wu had her and the former favorite concubine imprisoned. When Emperor Gaozong showed signs of mercy and considered releasing them, Wu had both women beaten, their hands and feet cut off, and then threw them into vats of wine to die slowly. As they were dying, one of them cursed Wu, saying she hoped to be reincarnated as a cat so she could haunt Wu forever. Wu became so paranoid about cats that she banned them from all imperial palaces for the rest of her life. Effective curse, honestly. Wu Zetian invented new torture methods like they were going out of style. She created torture devices specifically designed for her enemies. There was one called the jar torture, where victims were sealed inside a giant jar with their heads sticking out, then had a fire lit underneath. She'd slow roast her political opponents like rotisserie chickens. Another favorite was having people's joints broken systematically while she watched and ate breakfast, multitasking. She established a secret police force that would make Stalin jealous. Informants were everywhere, and accusation alone was enough for arrest. Torture wasn't used to extract confessions, it was just assumed you were guilty, and the torture was the punishment. If you were accused of plotting against Wu, you and your entire extended family would be executed. Cousins you never met would die because you had thoughts she didn't like. Despite, or perhaps because of her absolute ruthlessness, Wu Zetian's reign was actually pretty successful. The economy grew, the military expanded, and culture flourished. Turns out you can run an effective government when everyone is too terrified to be corrupt or inefficient. She ruled until she was 82 years old, which means she spent decades perfecting the art of creative cruelty. When she finally died in 705 CE, it was from natural causes in her sleep, which is frankly unfair. Now let's visit Korea for a family drama that went very, very wrong. You're Crown Prince Sado of Korea's Joseon dynasty, and you have the worst father in history. Not he embarrassed you at school bad or he missed your birthday bad. Your father is going to lock you in a rice chest and leave you there until you die of dehydration and heat stroke while he listens to you beg for water. Royal family dynamics are complicated. Prince Sado was born in 1735, and his father was King Yeongjo, a strict Confucian who expected absolute perfection. From the moment Sado could walk, he was being trained to be the perfect crown prince. The pressure was inhuman. Every mistake was punished, every failure was a humiliation. By the time Sado was a teenager, he developed what modern psychologists would recognize as severe mental illness, probably schizophrenia or a psychotic disorder triggered by extreme childhood trauma. Sado started having violent episodes. He'd kill servants for minor mistakes. He'd assault palace women. He'd wear mourning clothes randomly and claim he was seeing ghosts. He murdered at least 100 people during his psychotic breaks, and probably many more. The palace staff was terrified of him, but his father just kept punishing him for bringing shame to the family. No therapy, no compassion, just more pressure and humiliation. Truly ancient Korea's approach to mental health care was, have you tried being less embarrassing? In 1762, King Yeongjo decided he'd had enough. He couldn't execute his own son. That would be improper and against Confucian values. So instead, he ordered Sado to climb into a rice chest called a dwikme, which was basically a wooden box about 3 feet by 3 feet. Then he had it locked and left in the summer sun in the palace courtyard. No food, no water. Just a man in a box in the Korean summer heat. Sado's wife, Lady Hae-gyong, later wrote a memoir describing how she could hear him begging for water. He screamed for his father. He promised to be better. He pleaded for mercy. The king sat in his room nearby and listened to his son slowly dying. After 8 days, Sado stopped making noise. They opened the chest, and he was dead, dehydrated, covered in his own waste, his body contorted from trying to escape. The king's solution to his son's mental illness was to cook him alive in a box while listening to him beg for water. Father of the Year material right there. Sado's son later became King Jeongjo and spent his entire reign trying to rehabilitate his father's memory, building monuments and temples in his honor. The rice chest execution became one of the most infamous events in Korean history, a reminder that sometimes the cruelest thing isn't what you do to your enemies, it's what you do to your own children. Let's travel to Morocco for a ruler who really, really loved having children. Too much. You're living in Morocco in the late 1600s, and Sultan Ismail Ibn Sharif has a problem. Well, you have the problem, he has a solution. See, the Sultan believes that the best way to build a powerful dynasty is to have as many children as humanly possible. And when we say as many as possible, we mean he's in the Guinness Book of World Records with an estimated 888 children. 888. That's not a dynasty, that's a population. Ismail Ibn Sharif ruled Morocco from 1672 to 1727, a 55-year reign of absolute madness. He built a harem of 500 women whose only job was to produce his children. He'd visit them on rotation, like a demented fertility Santa Claus. By some accounts, he had 4 children born every single day at the peak of his reproductive enthusiasm. The administrative nightmare alone, keeping track of 888 children's birthdays, should have killed him. But Ismail wasn't just focused on creating life. He was equally passionate about taking it. He killed people constantly, casually, for entertainment. It's estimated that he personally killed over 30,000 people during his reign. Not in wars, just personally, with his own hands, because someone annoyed him. A servant brought his tea too cold? Decapitation. A builder made a wall slightly crooked? Decapitation. Someone looked at him wrong? You get the idea. He had a favorite method for killing people that was spectacularly theatrical. He'd ride his horse at full speed toward a victim, draw his sword, and decapitate them in a single motion as he passed by. He practiced this move constantly, treating human execution like an extreme sport. Servants would compete for the honor of being farthest from his daily riding path. Ismail was building a massive palace complex in Meknes, and he used 25,000 Christian slaves and 30,000 criminals as forced labor. If workers didn't meet their daily quotas, he'd have them built into the walls alive. Archaeologists have since found human remains inside the palace walls, workers who became part of the architecture. Talk about job security. You're technically still employed, just vertically and dead. Despite being an absolute monster, Ismail was a brilliant military tactician and administrator. He unified Morocco, fought off foreign invaders, and established a powerful dynasty. When he died in 1727, he left behind hundreds of children, a stronger Morocco, and a legacy as one of history's most prolific killers. His death sparked a massive succession crisis because with 888 children, everyone thought they should be sultan. The resulting civil war lasted 30 years. Imagine 888 siblings fighting over inheritance. Thanksgiving dinner would be an absolute nightmare. Finally, let's visit Russia, where even reforming the country required horrifying brutality. You're living in Russia in the early 1700s, and Tsar Peter the Great is dragging your medieval country kicking and screaming into the modern era. The kicking and screaming is literal, by the way, and sometimes it ends with your death. Peter the Great is called great because he modernized Russia, built St. Petersburg, and expanded the empire. He's not called great because he was a nice guy. He was absolutely not a nice guy. Peter had a vision of a modern, European-style Russia, and he didn't care how many people had to die to achieve it. He started small by forcing all nobles to shave their beards. In Russian Orthodox tradition, beards were sacred. Shaving was practically heresy. Peter stationed barbers at the city gates with orders to forcibly shave anyone entering with a beard. If you resisted, you'd be taxed heavily. If you really resisted, your beard would be torn out by the roots. Peter himself would sometimes personally shave nobles at parties, which is a power move if there ever was one. But beard policy was gentle compared to what he did to his own son. Tsarevich Alexei was everything Peter hated: traditional, religious, opposed to his father's reforms. Father and son had such a terrible relationship that Alexei fled Russia to seek asylum in Austria. Peter convinced him to return with promises of forgiveness. Then he had him arrested, tortured, and interrogated about who helped him escape. The torture was extensive and creative. Alexei was subjected to knouting, being beaten with a whip made of rawhide thongs fitted with metal hooks that would tear flesh off with each strike. Peter personally attended some of the torture sessions, watching his own son being flayed alive. Alexei confessed to everything, implicating dozens of people who were then also tortured and executed. After days of torture, Alexei died in prison. The official cause was listed as apoplexy, but everyone knew Peter had tortured his own son to death. Peter also enjoyed a good old-fashioned mass execution. When the Streltsy, an elite military unit, rebelled against him, Peter didn't just execute the leaders, he executed over 1,000 men in the most public, brutal ways possible. Hangings, beheadings, breaking on the wheel, you name it. The executions went on for months. Peter would force nobles to personally execute the rebels to prove their loyalty. If you were a noble and refused to kill someone, you'd become the next victim. Nothing says modern European nation like forcing your aristocracy to perform executions at sword point. The darkly funny part is that Peter's reforms actually worked. He built St. Petersburg from a swamp, modernized the military, reformed the government, and turned Russia into a major European power. But the human cost was staggering. Tens of thousands died building St. Petersburg alone. Workers would literally sink into the swamp and become part of the foundation. The city is built on bones, which is appropriately metal for Russian history. Peter died in 1725 from a bladder infection, probably caused by jumping into icy water to save drowning sailors, because even his death was dramatic and extra. Russia mourned him as a great reformer, while carefully not mentioning the thousands of corpses that paved the way to modernity. So there you have it, 5 rulers who took cruelty to artistic levels. A French nobleman who killed hundreds of children and kept their heads as trophies. A Chinese empress who invented new torture methods and banned cats out of paranoid spite. A Korean king who locked his mentally ill son in a rice chest and listened to him die over 8 days. A Moroccan sultan who had 888 children while personally killing 30,000 people. And a Russian tsar who tortured his own son to death while dragging his country into the modern era over mountains of corpses. The common thread is that absolute power plus deep psychological problems equals creative nightmares for everyone else. These weren't just bad rulers, they were artists of atrocity, each one finding new and innovative ways to make human suffering into a spectator sport. And the really disturbing part? Some of them are still celebrated as great leaders because they happen to be effective at running empires while also being complete monsters. Which one disturbed you the most? The serial killer nobleman? The cat-faring empress? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you very much for watching. My name is Dr. Hollowstone, and I am really smart. Until next time, farewell.